In early 1965, the air over America's drag strips trembled with something new. A machine so fierce, so unorthodox, it made the NHRA nervous. The Dodge Coronet A wasn't built to compete, it was built to dominate. Its wheelbase was warped for traction, its body lightened to the edge of sanity, its Hemi heart roaring like rebellion itself. But before it could rewrite history, the NHRA rewrote the rulebook. In a single decision, innovation was outlawed, and the car that changed everything was silenced. The mid-1960s were not just years on a calendar, they were a symphony of horsepower and rebellion echoing across America. The nation was thriving, Detroit was booming, and every street corner seemed to hum with the promise of speed. Gasoline was cheap, chrome was king, and the sound of a big block engine firing to life was enough to make a crowd gather like moths to a flame. Drag racing had evolved from back-alley showdowns into a national spectacle. From Pomona to Indianapolis, grandstands overflowed with fans hungry for raw acceleration. Not finesse, not luxury, but that heart-pounding moment when a car clawed at the pavement, leaving behind nothing but tire smoke and disbelief. It was a new kind of theater, and the stars of the stage were machines built by dreamers who refused to follow rules. This was the golden age of mechanical madness, when engineers were artists and the canvas was steel. The factories in Dearborn, Detroit, and Highland Park were at war, locked in a battle of ideas as much as horsepower. Each brand wanted to be the fastest, the loudest, the most fearless. Chevrolet had its lightweight Biscaynes and Bel Airs, Ford had unleashed the Fairlane Thunderbolt, and Chrysler's engineers were cooking up something even bolder, a new wave of cars that blurred the line between stock and experimental. And at the heart of that storm was Dodge. Chrysler's racing division had a simple mission: build machines that could not just win, but humiliate the competition. By 1964, their engineers were working deep into the night, guided by one name whispered with both awe and respect: Hemi. The hemispherical combustion chamber design had been around for years, but now it was perfected, refined, and weaponized. The result was an engine that breathed like a living thing, a 7.0-liter masterpiece that thundered down drag strips with relentless fury. But even the mighty Hemi needed a proper host, a body that could handle its wrath. That's when the 1965 Dodge Coronet A was born, not in a boardroom, but in the workshops where rulebooks were seen as suggestions rather than boundaries. These were not production cars in the traditional sense. They were prototypes wearing factory paint, designed for one purpose: to push physics until it cried for mercy. The AFX designation, meaning A Factory Experimental, hinted at what was to come. The Coronet's engineers began moving the front wheels forward by roughly 3 inches, and the rear wheels by nearly 8. It was a subtle tweak with monumental results. The altered stance shifted the car's weight distribution, improving traction during launches and keeping those massive rear slicks glued to the asphalt. The change looked odd, almost unnatural, but when the Christmas tree lights dropped, the Coronet exploded off the line like a cannonball. Spectators had never seen anything like it. Onlookers could feel the ground tremble as the altered wheelbase Dodge roared down the strip, front wheels skimming the air, exhaust thunder rolling across the bleachers. It wasn't just fast, it was alive. To many, it looked like the future of drag racing had arrived early. To others, especially the rulemakers, it looked like trouble. Because while the fans were in awe, the National Hot Rod Association, the NHRA, was growing increasingly uneasy. The factory experimental class had begun as a playground for creativity, but now the cars were morphing into something unrecognizable. What was supposed to be stock racing had turned into an arms race of radical engineering. The 1965 Dodge Coronet A, along with its Plymouth cousins, was rewriting what it meant to be a race car, and the NHRA wasn't sure how to handle it. Still, for a brief glorious moment, before the ink of bureaucracy could dry, the drag strip was pure magic. The smell of burning rubber mixed with nitromethane hung heavy in the air. Men leaned over fences, jaws slack, as these altered wheelbase Dodges ripped through the quarter-mile like something born of fire and defiance. Even rival racers couldn't help but respect them. Those who once scoffed at Chrysler's experiments now studied them, realizing they were witnessing a turning point. In those days, the cars weren't just machines, they were national symbols. They represented America's spirit of competition, its fearless pursuit of more. More speed, more sound, more shock. The Coronet A was not built for the showroom or the streets. It was built for glory, for headlines, for the brief blinding moment when a man could hold victory in his right foot and destiny in his left. But behind the cheers and smoke, a quiet storm was building. The NHRA had a decision to make, one that would determine the future of factory-backed racing. To them, the 1965 Dodge Coronet AFX was not a car, it was a warning sign. It was the moment innovation crossed the line into anarchy. That tension between creation and control, between vision and regulation, would soon ignite into one of the most defining controversies in drag racing history. And when the dust settled, the Coronet AFX would stand as both a triumph and a casualty of progress. Because sometimes, in the pursuit of perfection, even legends become outlaws, born to break boundaries. When the engineers at Dodge looked at the rulebook, they didn't see limitations, they saw a challenge. The year was 1965, and America was deep in the throes of a horsepower war. Every major automaker had its champion on the strip, but Chrysler's engineers wanted something different, something that would not just win races, but redefine what a race car could be. At Highland Park, Michigan, deep within Chrysler's engineering department, the team under Tom Hoover, a name whispered with reverence among racers, began sketching what would become the most radical Dodge Coronet ever conceived. Their goal was simple: build a car that could launch harder, run straighter, and terrify anything in the opposite lane. But the methods, those would be anything but ordinary. They began with the basic 1965 Dodge Coronet body, a familiar, boxy mid-size frame, and stripped it of anything that did not serve speed. The heavy steel front fenders, hood, and bumpers were tossed aside and replaced with lightweight aluminum panels and fiberglass components. Inside, comfort was a casualty of performance. No radio, no insulation, no creature comforts, only bare metal and determination. Every ounce saved meant milliseconds gained. Then came the heart of the beast, the legendary race-prepared Hemi engine. It was a 7.0-liter dual-carbureted masterpiece, fed by a cross-ram intake system that made it breathe like a dragon. Rated conservatively at over 500 horsepower, the Hemi's true numbers were closer to the 600 mark when tuned for competition. Its hemispherical combustion chambers allowed for efficient breathing and explosive power delivery, giving Dodge an unmatched advantage in straight-line fury. But the true innovation lay not just under the hood, but beneath the body itself. Engineers decided to alter the wheelbase, a move that would later define the entire era. By moving the front wheels forward approximately 3 inches and the rear wheels nearly 8, they shifted the car's center of gravity rearward. This meant one thing: traction. On the drag strip, traction was everything. The altered stance allowed the Coronet to hook to the pavement like no car before it, translating every ounce of torque into forward motion rather than wasted smoke. Visually, the result was striking. The car looked almost distorted, its front wheels awkwardly shoved forward, its stance unbalanced yet predatory. But when it launched, all doubts vanished. The moment the lights dropped, the front end leapt skyward, the slicks dug deep, and the car surged forward in a violent ballet of power and precision. Spectators swore they could feel the earth tremble beneath their feet. Each component on the Coronet AFX served a purpose. The battery was relocated to the trunk for better balance. The drive shaft was shortened. Special lightweight glass was fitted to save precious pounds. Even the fuel tank was re-engineered to improve weight distribution. It was a machine of pure intent, every nut, bolt, and weld a defiance of mediocrity. What made the Coronet AFX truly extraordinary, however, was not just its engineering, it was its philosophy. Dodge understood that drag racing was evolving beyond stock. The fans didn't want showroom cars anymore. They wanted spectacle. They wanted something so wild, so unfiltered, that it made the ground shake and the heart race. And Chrysler delivered exactly that. The first time a Dodge Coronet AFX hit the strip, it did not just compete, it rewrote expectations. The car's launches were so violent that many drivers had to relearn how to handle the sudden surge of torque. It was not uncommon to see them fight to keep the front wheels down as the car clawed its way forward. Rival teams watched in disbelief, their so-called stockers left gasping in the wake of Dodge's factory experiment. To many, the AFX represented the pinnacle of American ingenuity, a perfect union of creativity, engineering, and audacity. But to others, especially those in charge of maintaining fair play, it represented something dangerous. The car was too advanced, too purpose-built, too far removed from what the NHRA considered a production-based vehicle. Yet for the men who built it, those accusations were nothing but proof of success. The Coronet AFX was never meant to play within boundaries. It was built to break them. It was proof that when human imagination meets mechanical freedom, the results can shake an entire sport to its core. In garages and tuning shops across America, whispers spread. Mechanics studied photographs of the altered wheelbase. Competitors took notes, trying to understand how Dodge had achieved such violent efficiency. The Coronet had become more than a car. It was a concept, a symbol of how far one could go when courage outpaced conformity. But as Dodge's dominance grew, so did the unease within the NHRA. The rulebook, once a flexible framework for innovation, began to look more like a barricade. What the engineers saw as evolution, the officials saw as escalation. And while the 1965 Dodge Coronet AFX continued to tear through the quarter-mile, forces were already moving to stop it. The car that had been born to break boundaries was about to face the one barrier even it could not outrun: the rulebook. The rulebook strikes back. For a moment it looked as if Dodge had found the secret formula to drag racing immortality. The 1965 Dodge Coronet AFX was doing the impossible, beating everything in its path and turning the factory experimental class into a showcase of unrestrained genius. But what began as a victory lap soon turned into a standoff. The very innovation that made the car a legend would soon make it an outlaw. By the spring of 1965, the National Hot Rod Association was growing uneasy. The stands were full, the crowds were roaring, but behind the cheers, there was a growing sense that something had gone too far. The altered wheelbase Dodges and Plymouths, those mechanical mutants with their stretched stances and aluminum bones, were unlike anything the NHRA had ever sanctioned. To purists, they were monsters wearing factory badges. To innovators, they were masterpieces. The NHRA's leadership found itself trapped between tradition and transformation. The stock and superstock categories had always been the backbone of organized drag racing, where showroom cars proved their worth in a quarter-mile duel of equals. But Dodge's new creation wasn't equal. It was faster, lighter, and angrier than anything else in the field. Its 7.0-liter Hemi didn't just compete, it annihilated. At first, the NHRA tried to adapt. They considered rewriting classifications, adjusting weight limits, even forming a new subcategory for the altered wheelbase cars. But every proposal ran into the same problem. Once you open the door to unlimited factory experimentation, where does it end? Ford would build something wilder. General Motors would counter. The cars would drift further from the production models that fans could buy. The NHRA feared the heart of the sport, that connection between the cars on track and the cars in driveways, would be lost. And so, in a decision that would echo through the decades, the NHRA drew the line. They declared the altered wheelbase factory experimental cars, including the 1965 Dodge Coronet AFX non-stock. Overnight, these machines were banned from the stock and superstock classes that had made them famous. In an instant, the very rulebook that once encouraged creativity became a weapon against it. For Dodge's engineers and drivers, the ban felt like betrayal. They had done exactly what racing had always demanded: push boundaries, take risks, and build faster machines, yet now their success was being punished. Teams that had invested countless hours and resources into these cars were left with nowhere to race under NHRA sanction. The message was clear: innovation, at least in its rawest form, was no longer welcome. The reactions were split down the middle. Traditionalists applauded the NHRA for restoring order, claiming the altered wheelbase cars were freaks of engineering that had no place in a fair competition. But racers, the men who lived for the smell of burnt rubber and the thunder of big engines, saw it differently. To them, the NHRA's decision was the moment the sport turned its back on its own soul. What happened next was something the NHRA never expected. The banned machines did not disappear, they simply found new ground to conquer. Many of the outlawed Dodges and Plymouths migrated to the American Hot Rod Association, or NHRA, which welcomed innovation with open arms. Independent drag strips, free from NHRA sanction, began hosting their own events, drawing massive crowds who wanted to see the banned beasts run. In a twist of irony, the NHRA's attempt to control chaos only fueled it further. Drivers like Dick Landy and Sox and Martin became folk heroes, their altered wheelbase Coronets and Belvederes tearing through quarter miles across America. They raced under no banners, following no rules but their own. Fans called them funny-looking stockers, a nickname that would soon give rise to an entirely new class of racing. The funny car revolution had begun, born directly from the ashes of NHRA regulation. To the officials, it was just another rule enforcement. But to the racers and spectators who loved those cars, it was a declaration of war on creativity. The 1965 Dodge Coronet AFX had proven what was possible when engineers were given freedom, and now that freedom was being taken away. The NHRA wanted order. Dodge wanted evolution. In that clash, a legend was born. Because when you ban something born of brilliance, it does not vanish, it multiplies. The NHRA's rule may have stopped one car from racing, but it ignited a movement that no one could contain. Across garages, drag strips, and small-town speed shops, racers were whispering the same truth. If they're going to ban us, we'll build something they can't ignore. And they did. The outlaw Coronet AFX, stripped of its official glory but not its soul, became the spark that lit a revolution. What began as a ban would soon evolve into a new age of fire-breathing, fiberglass-bodied monsters that blurred the line between machine and spectacle. The NHRA had won the battle for control, but Dodge and every racer who refused to bow to the rulebook had already won the war for innovation. When the roar of the 60s faded into the quieter hum of regulation, the 1965 Dodge Coronet AFX stood as more than just a relic. It was a turning point. What Chrysler's engineers built under fluorescent lights and long nights became the blueprint for an era that the NHRA never meant to inspire. The rule that tried to tame it instead fueled 1,000 new dreams. The Coronet's wild stance, its nose lifted high and rear tires biting down, became the visual language of rebellion. A car that refused to kneel to conformity. Collectors today treat the AFX not as a machine, but as a symbol of what drag racing once was: raw, unpredictable, and full of human spirit. Every surviving car, often found tucked away in quiet garages or proudly displayed under show lights, carries whispers of the racers who risked everything for one more tenth of a second. The legacy of the Coronet is not measured in trophies or records, but in the way it kept the fire of competition alive long after the rulebook tried to smother it. In the decades that followed, nostalgia for the AFX era grew stronger. Fans who once watched from wooden bleachers now passed down their memories to sons and grandsons, stories of the day when Detroit's muscle was too wild for even the NHRA to handle. The 1965 Dodge Coronet AFX became immortal, not through acceptance but through rejection. The rule that ended its reign also etched its name in history. The 1965 Dodge Coronet AFX was not just a car, it was a message written in smoke and speed. It proved that when human ambition meets mechanical brilliance, rules will always struggle to keep up. The NHRA may have shut its doors on the Coronet, but what they really did was open a new chapter, one where innovation lived on through memory, legend, and rebellion. Even today, when you hear the deep thunder of a classic V8 echo across a track, you can almost feel the spirit of that AFX Dodge Coronet charging down the strip, front wheels clawing the air, as if daring time itself to catch it. It reminds us of an era when racers built with their hearts first and worried about the rules later, when every pass down the quarter mile was a declaration of freedom. For those who lived it, the sound of that engine is more than nostalgia, it is identity. It is the story of men who looked at the limits of what was possible and decided to go faster anyway. The NHRA's rulebook may have tried to contain that spirit, but the fire it sparked still burns in every enthusiast, every restorer, and every garage where someone is rebuilding a piece of history. Because innovation never truly dies, it just finds new roads to travel, and somewhere, in the memory of the 60s, beneath the scent of race fuel and hot rubber, the ghost of the 1965 Dodge Coronet AFX still waits for the green light,